He took everything I built, until he had nothing left. Part 1. I wasn't supposed to be the son who loved a spreadsheet more than sleep. When I was 16, Dad tossed me the keys to a dust-choked storage unit and said, "If you want to learn the business, start by counting what we still own." I spent a summer in there with a clip-on lamp and a handheld scanner that overheated if you breathed too hard on it. I learned that inventory doesn't lie the way people do. Boxes either exist or they don't. Numbers either add up or they don't. And when they don't, there's a story. That's the year I fell in love with stories told in numbers. My brother, Ethan, fell in love with stories told about him. He was loud, he was pretty, and he had a gravity you only see in black holes and prom kings. People orbited him because he was fun. Teachers gave him second chances because he's got so much charm. He could blow up the microwave reheating foil, and somehow the cafeteria lady would tell him he was a delight. Dad worshipped him. Mom worshipped the idea of us getting along. Me? I worshipped everything that stayed where it belonged. A palette where it's supposed to be, a partner who pays on time, a promise followed by the right action. After college, I didn't take a trip or a breath. I slid right back into the family company, regional logistics with a fancy name and a not-so-fancy building by the river that floods every third spring. I was in the office at 6:30 like it was church. The air smelled like printer toner and spilled coffee and sometimes wet cardboard. That smell makes other people think, ugh. It makes me think home. My friends were the loading dock guys and the night dispatchers. I learned the drivers' kids' names and which routes gave you a sunrise worth pulling over for. I learned which clients would ghost you on a Friday and call you in a panic on Sunday. I learned that if you show up and keep showing up, the world gets quieter around you. Ethan showed up too, at parties, at charity galas, at ribbon cuttings where he'd arrive 20 minutes late and still get ushered to the front for the photos. He had a gift for making money look like a personality trait. If you asked him what we did, he'd say, "We move dreams," and then tap his own chest and smile like he invented trucks. I used to watch Dad watching him. There was this look, pride mixed with a little fear, like Ethan was a thoroughbred that might stumble or soar, and either way it would make for a hell of a race. When Dad watched me, the look was softer, more practical. I was the good wrench, the reliable tire, useful, replaceable. The first time I pulled an all-nighter because the river jumped its banks and drowned the South Warehouse, I expected a good job. Not a parade, just a nod. I got a text from Dad at noon the next day. "Ethan's got a thing tonight, be there." The thing was a charity event with step-and-repeat photos and everyone drinking rose like it was a contest. Ethan made a speech about resilience. I had mud on my boots. I wore a suit anyway. That's the dance. You show up for each other even when the music isn't your taste. The thing about Dad is he built something out of nothing. He really did. He'd tell me about cold calling clients from a payphone because his apartment line got shut off. He'd tell me about bartering, hauling a guy's furniture for an old forklift that coughed like a smoker and leaked hydraulic fluid like tears. He'd tell me about my grandfather's hands, and how those hands never stopped until they did, and how that was the day Dad decided he'd never answer to anyone who didn't bleed beside him. He believed in sweat and luck and sons. He just didn't believe the equation required both of us. When he got sick, it was like watching a building tilt in slow motion. The kind of tilt that makes your brain whisper, "It's fine," while your stomach starts throwing up flares. He refused the soft things, pillows fluffed too aggressively, voices dropped too tenderly. He insisted on talking shop until his breath ran out. I sat on the edge of his bed and ran profit-loss scenarios while Mom pretended not to cry in the kitchen. Ethan brought flowers and nicer pajamas, kissed Dad's forehead, and took calls on the balcony. If I sound bitter, it's because I am. If I sound ungrateful, it's because grief eats gratitude and leaves the bones. Still, there was one thing I was sure of. When the time came, the company would land with the person who kept their hands on the wheel when the road turned to ice. Dad died on a Tuesday. The air felt like snow even though it was October. The will was read that Friday in an office that tried too hard to smell like lemon. The lawyer was the kind of man who never sweated, only perspired. His tie had tiny anchors on it, and I couldn't stop staring at those anchors while my brother bounced his knee and Mom crushed a tissue into an unrecognizable wet sculpture. I've replayed the words 1,000 times, and they're always the same because paperwork is honest. The controlling interest in the company is bequeathed to my eldest son, Ethan. My name followed later. A trust. A lump sum. Words like grateful and appreciative that fit inside greeting cards and not inside lives. If you want to know whether your father thought of you as a tool or a legacy, watch which box he checks when the pen is in his hand and he's measuring the end of his days. I didn't say anything at first. Mom made a small sound like a bird hitting a window. Ethan sucked in a breath the way kids do right before they blow out birthday candles. The lawyer kept reading. There were paragraphs about the house, about a boat we never used, about my grandmother's jewelry, about college funds for grandchildren who didn't exist yet. I watched the anchors on his tie bob up and down when he swallowed. Finally, Ethan said, "Dad knew I'd take us global." He was trying to smile and be solemn at the same time. He chose solemn. Then he ruined it by patting my shoulder like I was a Labrador who'd almost caught the ball. "We'll find a place for you." I said, "I already have a place." He misunderstood and lit up. "Yeah, exactly. Operations King." He said King, like it was a sticker you give a second grader for not interrupting during circle time. I left the room before anyone could say be reasonable. That first night, I went back to the warehouse. Not because I'm noble, because that's where my body goes when my brain unravels. I walked the aisles with the lights off, counting steps and listening to the building breathe. Buildings breathe if you learn their language. The hum of compressors, the ventricular thud of a dock plate settling, the inhale-exhale of the giant fans that keep everyone from frying in July. Somewhere between aisle 11 and aisle 12, I stopped and put my forehead against a stack of shrink-wrapped boxes. I said out loud, "Okay." Not because it was okay, because that word has the right shape when you have no other. The next day I turned in my keycard. I didn't make a speech. I didn't flip any tables. I wrote my resignation in 3 sentences. "I'm leaving. I won't be a shadow for your son. Pay the team their bonuses." I tied up the projects in the attached doc. I CC'd HR and legal and our accountant, Martin, who is the only person I've ever met who can make gaps sound like poetry. Martin replied with a period. If you don't know accountants, that reads as a scream. What followed was not a grand reinvention. I didn't start a competing company. I didn't travel the world and learn to paint. I moved into a small house 2 neighborhoods over, the kind with a porch that feels like a promise and a kitchen that feels like an apology. I bought a coffee maker I didn't need. I slept like someone had cut the power to my skull. Days passed. The calendar app beeped less. My hands didn't know what to do, so they found projects. A door that stuck, a fence whose nails had lost their courage, a patch of yard that could be convinced to grow tomatoes if I did my part. People love a redemption arc. What they don't tell you is that most of it is silence. Sometimes I'd see our trucks on the highway and feel my ribs shift, like my bones were trying to turn the car around. I didn't. I learned the names of the neighborhood dogs. I learned what time the mail carrier preferred the walkway cleared in winter. I started running early in the morning because no one expects anything from you at 5:30 a.m. except to keep moving forward. I watched Ethan from a distance. You can watch anyone if you know where to look. Public filings, press releases, the kind of photos that end up in the society section of local magazines. He was very good at taking credit for momentum that other people engineered years before. He was very good at throwing parties and calling them networking. He swapped out the battered chairs in the conference room for sleeker ones and called it a new era. The people who did not find his charm an adequate substitute for competence were quiet in public and loud with me in private. "You didn't hear this from me," they'd say, and then I'd hear it from them. Vendors paid later. Drivers leaving for competitors with better routes. Turnover among dispatch. Small frayed edges that become tears if you tug. I stayed out. Except for Martin. Martin kept sending me financial reports, public ones I could have pulled myself, and then private ones I couldn't. He'd label them for the scrapbook. I never replied. He knew I read them because he knows where the commas move when I'm angry. We never met in person during that stretch. If this is where you expect me to say we schemed, I didn't. Not yet. This is the part of the story where everyone breathes, and then waits to see if the house we just vacated burns down on its own. It didn't. Not right away. Ethan isn't stupid. He's just incurious about anything that doesn't applaud. He grew our marketing budget like it owed him rent. He hired a branding agency that gave the trucks a paint job so shiny, you could see yourself looking a little better than you are. He announced new lanes without negotiating fuel hedges. He made 3 strategic partnerships with companies whose main strategy was putting strategic in their names. The first time a supplier cut our credit terms from net 45 to net 15, Martin sent me a screenshot of the notice with that single period again. I started saying we in my head again when I thought about the company, even though I had no right to. I stopped correcting myself. We is a kind of haunt. Mom pretended everything was fine until she couldn't. I did the grocery run with her and watched her compare prices like someone practicing a language she used to be fluent in. Your brother's under a lot of pressure, she said, as if pressure wasn't the only thing I'd learned to breathe in. I know, I said, because the other options were rude or true or both. The last conversation I had with Dad, when he still had most of his sentences, wasn't about the will. It was about the river. He said, it rises the way bad decisions do. Slow, then all at once. I thought he was giving me a metaphor. Maybe he was giving me a map. Ethan invited me back once. Come consult, he said, like the word could erase 5 months of us not talking. You always had a nose for rot. I told him no, and he laughed the way people do when they think they misheard the usher at the door saying we're full. I didn't tell him the real reason. The real reason was that if I walked back into that building, the part of me that only knows how to repair would take over, and repair is a kind of love I didn't want to give him anymore. Months turned to a year. A year turned into 2. I started to date someone who didn't need me to explain why spreadsheets count as intimacy. We cooked on Sundays. We fought about nothing and then made up about something. I told her about the storage unit and the anchors on a lawyer's tie and a father who taught me loyalty like it was a trade skill. She told me about her sister's kid and how when babies laugh it sounds like bells breaking open. The company became a headline once. Local logistics staple announces bold expansion. I laughed into my coffee so hard it stung my nose. Bold is such a generous word. Bold is what you call it when you jump without checking your pockets for a parachute. Martin started signing his emails, take care, which is accountant for brace. The thing about revenge is that people expect it to be hot, loud, operatic. They expect a switch to flip. What really happens is 1,000 small permissions. You give yourself permission to stop excusing someone's behavior. You give yourself permission to label a pattern. You give yourself permission to listen when a person who has no reason to lie tells you the truth. Martin asked to meet. He chose a diner with cracked red booths and coffee that tastes like peanuts. He ordered oatmeal. I ordered nothing because we weren't staying. He slid a thin folder across the table. Inside were numbers that told a story he didn't have to narrate. Rising SG&A without revenue to justify it. Days sales outstanding creeping up like ivy. A burn rate that assumed next quarter would be kinder than this one because the calendar said so. We can put a tourniquet on it, I said, out of muscle memory. We could, he said. He stirred his oatmeal without looking at it. Or we can let natural consequences do what lectures can't. Not my company, I said, and the words tasted like metal. He looked at me then, and because Martin's eyes always look a little tired, you notice when the tired lightens. That has never been true, he said. We didn't plot. Not that day. We named the weather. On the anniversary of Dad's death, I went to the river and watched it keep its own counsel. I thought about calling Ethan and didn't. I thought about throwing the folder into the water and didn't. I stood there until my cheeks hurt from the wind and then went home and cooked pasta and salted it exactly enough. The small, unremarkable acts you do when you want your body to believe you're safe. Then, months later, long after the will and the resignations and the distance had hardened into a landscape I could navigate without looking down, there was a knock on my door. I knew before I opened it. The silence had a shape I recognized. Ethan stood on my porch wearing a coat that used to make him look rich and now made him look like he was borrowing someone else's life. The blue had lost its brag. His hair was the kind of mess that doesn't happen by choice. He smiled, and it didn't land anywhere. Hey, he said, like we were teenagers, and he was asking if I wanted to grab fries after practice. I looked at his hands. They were empty. Can I come in? He asked. I stepped aside. He passed me, bringing with him the faint smell of cologne and panic. In the kitchen, he stared at the coffee maker like it might judge him. I'm not here to fight, he said. I'm here to talk. Talking is free, I said. He did that laugh again, hopeful, nervous, weaponized. You always were the funny one. He was wrong about that, too. We sat at the table. The same table where I've fixed a hinge, balanced a checkbook, learned how to say a small yes to my own life. He scratched at a spot on the wood with a thumbnail until I shot him a look and he stopped. Things have been hard, he said, choosing the word like he was shopping for one that wouldn't embarrass him. Hard how? I asked, even though Martin's folder was a chorus line of how. He looked at the coffee maker again. Do you have anything stronger? I got up. I pulled down 2 glasses and a bottle of bourbon a friend had given me when her dad got sober and didn't need it around the house anymore. It wasn't expensive. It was honest. I poured. I pushed a glass toward him. To old times, he offered, the line out of habit more than conviction. To accurate times, I said. We clinked anyway. He drank like the glass might run away. He put it down and didn't look at me. I need help, he said, and it was the first true thing he'd said since he stepped over my threshold. I refilled his glass. Then I refilled mine. The kitchen clock ticked loud enough to be a third presence in the room. Help like what? I asked. He told me. Numbers. Deadlines. People he'd charmed until they learned the cost. Banks that prefer predictable men. Partners who call you visionary until the vision blurs and they remember they have their own mortgages. He told me about stubby pencils in rooms where no one wears photographed smiles. He told me how a company can survive mismanagement longer than you think and then die faster than you can say we should have listened. He wiped his face with the heel of his hand and tried not to call it crying. I thought Dad believed in me, he said. The way he said it made me think he'd never once asked what belief requires. He did, I said. Another true thing. He believed you'd learn. Ethan looked up quick, like the word learn was a slap. I can, he said. I will. I need a way to make the noise stop long enough to hear what I'm supposed to do. I picked up the bourbon and tilted it, watching the amber rise and settle, rise and settle. I thought about the storage unit and the anchors and the river. I thought about Martin's period. I thought about how revenge is a shape you only fully recognize when your enemy asks for your hand like a drowning man. I poured us each another measure. I slid his glass closer. Here's to a drink, I said, and to silence. He didn't understand yet. That's the thing about stories. Sometimes you don't realize the chapter you're in until the page turns itself. Part February 5th, The Quiet War. Ethan slept on my couch that night. He didn't ask. He just folded. His body sagged like the weight of his life had finally noticed gravity again. I covered him with a blanket that smelled faintly of detergent and indifference. The house went still. In the morning, I found him sitting at my kitchen table, staring at his phone like it was a ghost that wouldn't stop whispering. There was a text open from someone named Lydia, legal counsel. The message read, "We've exhausted extensions. The board will convene Monday. You should prepare for contingencies." He looked up when he heard me. Do you have coffee? He asked, voice shredded. Always, I said, because some rituals survive any war. He took the mug in both hands like it might steady him. I messed up, he said quietly. It wasn't a confession. It was an obituary for the man he thought he was. For a long time, I said nothing. The silence between us wasn't awkward. It was dense. He started talking again, about how the banks were circling, how investors wanted blood, how Martin went quiet after a disagreement about liquidity ratios. I almost smiled at that. And how everyone suddenly stopped answering calls that began with his name. I can fix this, he said finally. If I can just get a bridge loan or maybe restructure the freight side. You know the numbers better than anyone. Maybe you could. I cut him off. No. He blinked. You don't even know what I was going to ask. I do, I said. And the answer's still no. He tried to smile, like charm was still a currency he could spend. Come on, man. It's family. We can rebuild it together. Family already tried that, I said. You inherited it. The way his face crumpled told me he finally understood the difference between inheritance and ownership. He didn't understand yet. That's the thing about stories. Sometimes you don't realize the chapter you're in until the page turns itself. Part 2. The Quiet War. Ethan slept on my couch that night. He didn't ask. He just folded. His body sagged like the weight of his life had finally noticed gravity again. I covered him with a blanket that smelled faintly of detergent and indifference. The house went still. In the morning, I found him sitting at my kitchen table, staring at his phone like it was a ghost that wouldn't stop whispering. There was a text open from someone named Lydia, legal counsel. The message read, "We've exhausted extensions. The board will convene Monday. You should prepare for contingencies." He looked up when he heard me. Do you have coffee? He asked, voice shredded. Always, I said, because some rituals survive any war. He took the mug in both hands like it might steady him. I messed up, he said quietly. It wasn't a confession. It was an obituary for the man he thought he was. For a long time, I said nothing. The silence between us wasn't awkward. It was dense. He started talking again about how the banks were circling, how investors wanted blood, how Martin went quiet after a disagreement about liquidity ratios. I almost smiled at that. And how everyone suddenly stopped answering calls that began with his name. I can fix this, he said finally. If I can just get a bridge loan or maybe restructure the freight side. You know the numbers better than anyone. Maybe you could. I cut him off. No. He blinked. You don't even know what I was going to ask. I do, I said. And the answer's still no. He tried to smile, like charm was still a currency he could spend. Come on, man. It's family. We can rebuild it together. Family already tried that, I said. You inherited it. The way his face crumpled told me he finally understood the difference between inheritance and ownership. Ethan's company, our company, began to look fine on paper. That was the trick. Cash flow statements clean enough for shareholders to glance and move on. Invoices still paid. Salaries met. But the edges told a different story. Long-term contracts migrated to affiliated firms. Vehicles leased from entities we controlled. Software licenses purchased through intermediaries we owned. A siphon dressed as structure. Martin once sent me a spreadsheet labeled Reclamation Schedule. Column A, former assets. Column B, new owners. Column C, estimated time to realization. At the bottom, one note. Every empire collapses from within. We're just saving the salvageable materials. Meanwhile, Ethan was busy playing savior. He gave interviews about streamlining and modernizing. He hosted board dinners at restaurants where the wine cost more than the drivers made in a week. He smiled through teeth paid for by the company's dental plan. And he never noticed that the accountant in the background, quiet, pale, methodical Martin, was rerouting his kingdom piece by piece. I didn't see Ethan much during that time. Every now and then he'd call. Sometimes drunk. Sometimes desperate. Once, he left a voicemail that said, "You think Dad would be proud of either of us?" I deleted it before it finished playing. The day everything cracked started like any other Tuesday. I was fixing a hinge on my porch door when Martin showed up in person, something he hadn't done in years. He was holding a thin envelope. "What's this?" I asked. "The last transfer," he said. "After this, there's nothing left to move." Inside were the documents naming Arden Holdings, our clean, quiet shell, as the majority owner of the only profitable segment left in Ethan's company, the freight logistics arm. A network of contracts, licenses, and physical assets that I'd built years ago, the part that actually mattered. "Congratulations," Martin said, sitting down like a man who's just finished digging a very deep hole. "You own what you should have inherited." I didn't know whether to thank him or apologize to the universe. 2 weeks later, the news broke. Local logistics firm declares bankruptcy amid mismanagement allegations. Ethan's photo ran beneath the headline. Same charming smile, but eyes hollow. The comments online were vicious. Should have let his brother run it. Nepotism kills more companies than recessions. Typical rich kid story. For a long time, I stared at the photo. Not out of joy, not out of pity, just recognition. Because that's what happens when you live long enough. You start seeing yourself in the people who destroyed you. That night, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I didn't answer. The voicemail was short. "It's me. I'm done. You won, okay? But I need to know why you never fought back before." I saved that voicemail. I've never listened to it again. Martin told me later that Ethan left town. Liquidated what little he had left. No address. No forwarding information. Just disappeared into the static of people who used to be important. For a year, the world was quiet again. Then, last week, the same knock echoed on my door. He looked worse this time. Thinner. Eyes sunk deep. Cheeks sharp enough to cut. He smiled anyway. "Heard you're doing well," he said. "Guess we traded places." I didn't invite him in right away. I wanted to see if he'd ask why I hadn't called. He didn't. When I finally opened the door, he stepped in and said, "Nice place." "Cozy. I prefer stable," I said. He laughed, but it died halfway. "I need help," he repeated, same words, smaller voice. "Help like before?" I asked. "No," he said. "Help like redemption." That word hung in the air like a fragile promise. He sat, and for the first time, he didn't try to charm me. He just looked tired. "I know what happened," he said. I stayed still. "Martin," he continued. "He came clean after the bankruptcy hearing. Said it was all legal. Just not moral." I said nothing. Silence is sometimes its own confession. He looked at me, eyes glassy. You could have taken everything. Why didn't you just take it all? Why leave me anything? I leaned back, staring at the bourbon bottle still half full from that first night. Because, I said, I wanted you to live long enough to understand what you lost. He nodded slowly, as if the truth was heavier than any sentence I could have invented. We sat there until the ice in our glasses melted. When he finally stood, he said, "You always were the better man." I didn't correct him. Some lies deserve mercy. Part 3. The Reckoning. After Ethan left that night, I didn't sleep. The house smelled like old bourbon and ghosts. I sat in the same chair for hours, staring at the condensation ring his glass had left on the table. A small, perfect circle that meant nothing and everything at once. It's strange what your brain decides to fixate on after years of restraint. That little ring felt like evidence. Not of crime, but of closure. But the truth is, closure is a fairy tale adults tell themselves to sleep. There's only continuation, new versions of the same ache. The accountant's visit. 2 days later, Martin showed up again, unannounced. He never knocked more than twice. Accountant rhythm. Precise, efficient, slightly impatient. I opened the door before the third knock could land. He stepped inside, eyes darting around like he was afraid the walls might be wearing wires. "You've seen him," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "How bad?" "Bad enough that I almost felt sorry." He snorted softly. "Almost." I poured coffee while he unpacked a folder from his satchel. Same kind of folder as always. Beige, understated, smelling faintly of ink and inevitability. He placed it on the table, next to that faint ring from Ethan's glass. "That's the last piece," he said. I didn't open it. I already knew what it was. The final ownership transfer, this time not just for assets or contracts, but the dormant corporate entity itself. With one signature, Arden Holdings would officially own the remnants of my father's company. The paperwork was legal, clean, irreversible. "You could rebuild it," Martin said quietly. "Rename it. Start fresh." I stared at the folder. "That feels wrong." He tilted his head. "You earned it." "Maybe," I said. "But earning and deserving aren't the same thing. Ghosts don't clock out." For weeks after that, I kept expecting something, an email, a call, a headline, a reckoning beyond the paperwork. But nothing came. Ethan was gone again, swallowed by the same silence that once shielded me. Then, one night, I got a letter. Not an email, a letter. Thick paper, my name written in looping cursive I hadn't seen since we were teenagers. Inside, a single sheet. No greeting. No apology. Just, "You won. I understand now what it feels like to be forgotten by the thing you love most. I hope you take care of it better than I did." There was no signature. Didn't need one. I folded it once and slid it into a drawer beside my father's old watch. The one he wore on every warehouse inspection, the face cracked, the strap patched with tape. A watch that didn't tick anymore, but still carried time like memory does, imperfect, eternal. The board's collapse. 3 months later, I was called to a bankruptcy deposition, not as a defendant, but as a consultant. Apparently, Arden Holdings was the largest secured creditor of the defunct company, which meant my presence was advisable. That's how corporate revenge looks in real life. Dull paperwork and tired lawyers in beige rooms pretending numbers aren't soaked in blood. One of the attorneys, a woman named Farrell, asked me flat out, "Mr. Smith, did you knowingly benefit from the diversion of funds?" I looked her straight in the eye. "I benefited from competence." The court reporter paused typing for half a second, probably deciding whether sarcasm counted as a quote. Martin was there too, impassive, a monument to plausible deniability. When it was over, he and I shared a look that wasn't triumph. Exactly. More like exhaustion wearing a thin coat of justification. "Outside the courthouse," he said, "you're free now." I laughed once, sharp and bitter. "You think this was prison?" He didn't answer. Maybe because he knew it was. The rebuild. Arden Holdings didn't stay dormant for long. Quietly, I reactivated our old trucking routes, the ones that still had demand and loyal clients. I hired back some of the drivers who'd been left stranded after Ethan's fall. I told them, "New company, same mission." They didn't ask questions. Working people rarely do when you give them consistency. I kept the branding simple. No flashy colors, no slogans. Just black and white logos and steel gray trucks that looked like purpose on wheels. We didn't need billboards. We needed reliability. Within a year, we were solvent. Profitable, even. Not glamorous, not viral, but steady. And steady, I learned, is the loudest kind of revenge. The brother returns again. You'd think that'd be the end, right? That the story wrapped neatly around itself like a ledger balancing out. But fate has a sense of humor. 18 months later, Ethan showed up again. This time not on my doorstep, but in the company lobby. The receptionist buzzed me. "There's a man here to see you. Says it's personal." I came downstairs and there he was. Thinner still, hair longer, eyes carrying that same hollow calm people get when they've run out of plans. He held out a small manila envelope. "This belongs to you," he said. Inside, Dad's original fountain pen. The one he used to sign every major deal. The one that was supposed to go to the successor. Ethan must have kept it through everything. The will, the bankruptcy, the years of fallout. And now he was giving it back. I looked at him. "Why now?" He shrugged. "Because it stopped feeling like mine the day I realized you never needed a signature to own what you built." He turned to go. I stopped him. "Ethan," I said. He paused, halfway to the door. "You were right about one thing," I said. "Dad did believe in you. He just thought belief was enough." He nodded slowly. "Yeah," he said. "So did I." Then he walked out of the building. Didn't look back. Didn't have to. The accountant's final ledger. A week later, Martin retired. He sent me one last email with a subject line that simply said, "Audit complete." In the body, all accounts reconciled. All debts cleared. Some moral, some financial. Remember, revenge is a transaction. Don't make it your business model. Attached was a spreadsheet, a final record of every transfer, every line item that had moved the company from Ethan's name back to mine. At the bottom, a single cell in italics. Balance, 0.00, as it should be. The weight of silence. For months after that, I didn't speak of it. Not to my partner. Not to Mom. I'd built something again, yes. But every time I heard the low rumble of one of our trucks passing on the highway, I felt a twinge. Not pride, not guilt, just echo. People think revenge is about winning. It's not. It's about restoring symmetry, and realizing symmetry doesn't feel like peace. One night, long after everyone else had gone home, I sat in my office staring at the bourbon bottle still on the shelf. Same one from that first night. Only a finger left. I poured it into a glass, held it up, and whispered to silence. Then I drank. Part 4. The Inheritance of Ash. It's a strange thing, rebuilding your life from the wreckage of justice. People imagine it feels like a parade, closure, champagne, satisfaction. But the truth? It's quiet. Too quiet. The first few months after Martin retired, I tried to live like someone who'd won. I woke early, ran along the river, drank good coffee, checked freight reports like they were prayer lists. On paper, everything was perfect. New contracts, steady revenue, happy clients. But I'd wake in the middle of the night to the sound of phantom footsteps in the hall, memories of drivers, dispatchers, my father's voice barking numbers down a phone line. The ghosts of what we built. You don't get to turn those off just because you're on the right side of the balance sheet. Mom's call. It was a Thursday when my mother called. She didn't start with hello. Just, "You saw your brother?" "Yes," I said. "Twice." "Yes." Silence. Then, quietly, "He came to see me." That surprised me more than it should have. "When?" "Last week." He looked lost, thinner than I remembered. He asked about Dad's watch. "It's here," I said. "I told him that," she said. He smiled. Said that made sense. Her voice cracked a little, then steadied. "Do you ever think about what your father would say if he saw what's become of you too?" "Every day," I said. "Does it make you proud?" "No," I admitted. "It makes me tired." The visit. 2 days later, Mom showed up at my office. No warning. No appointment. Just a presence. She still wore Dad's old cardigan, the one that smelled faintly of oil and lavender and memory. She looked at the Arden Holdings sign on the wall and sighed. "This is yours?" she asked. "Yes." "It looks the same. That's the point." She sat across from me and folded her hands. "Ethan told me what happened." I leaned back. "Did he?" "He said you saved what could be saved. That Martin was loyal to you. That you didn't steal anything. You just waited." That's one way to put it. She looked at me with eyes that had seen more storms than any ledger could track. "He also said you never once celebrated." I laughed softly. "Would you like me to?" "No," she said. "But I'd like to know if you're free. What freedom costs." That question sat with me for weeks. Freedom. What did that even mean anymore? I'd built the company twice, once for my father's approval and once for my own vindication. Both times, it cost me peace. I used to think hard work made a man righteous. Then I learned it just makes him tired faster. I used to think fairness could be restored. Then I learned that some debts, once paid, still echo interest. I visited the river again, the same one Dad warned me about. It was low that season, sunlight cutting silver ribbons across the surface. I knelt at the edge, picked up a handful of wet stones, and dropped them one by one. Each splash felt like punctuation. Slow, then all at once, I whispered, "You were right, Dad." The river didn't answer. It never does, but it always remembers. The funeral without death. 3 months later, Mom called again. "Your brother's gone," she said. I froze. "Gone where?" "I don't know," she said. "He left me a note." I drove to her house that night. The note was sitting on the kitchen counter, folded neatly in half. "Mom, I need to start somewhere no one knows my name. Don't worry. I'll be fine. Tell him I forgive him, even if he doesn't need it." She was sitting at the table, hands shaking slightly. "He didn't take any money," she said. "Just his father's old coat." I nodded. That's all he ever really owned. We didn't say it, but we both knew this was a kind of funeral, one without a body, just a truth buried quietly somewhere far away. The company party. A year later, Arden turned 5. We were profitable, growing modestly, expanding westward. The team insisted on a celebration. Music, food, laughter echoing off warehouse walls that used to hold my father's inventory. Someone brought up old photos of the original company, the one under Dad's name. There was Ethan, smiling too wide, arms slung around me at some ribbon cutting I barely remembered. The crowd laughed about the hairstyles, the logos, the trucks that looked like relics. I smiled too, but it felt like acting. When no one was looking, I slipped outside for air. The night was warm, the air humming with crickets and distant traffic. I pulled out my phone, scrolled through old messages, and found the voicemail Ethan left years ago. "You won, okay? But I need to know why you never fought back before." I pressed play. His voice cracked halfway through. For the first time, I didn't hear arrogance. Just a man realizing too late what inheritance really means. The truth about winning. I think people misunderstand what revenge gives you. It doesn't erase betrayal. It doesn't rewrite history. It just balances the math. But the math doesn't hug you back. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd fought for the company when Dad died. Shouted, sued, demanded fairness. Maybe Ethan would have resented me sooner. Maybe he would have respected me. Maybe we both would have saved ourselves a decade of becoming strangers. But the truth is, I don't think I ever wanted revenge. I wanted recognition, for someone to say, "I see you. I know what you built." And by the time I got that, it was meaningless. Mom's last visit. A year later, Mom passed away quietly in her sleep. At her funeral, a man handed me an envelope. No name, just my address on the front. Inside was a postcard, a photo of a dusty road somewhere in Arizona. On the back, "Still moving, still learning, still trying to be better. Hope the silence finally feels like peace." No return address. No signature needed. I smiled. For the first time, it wasn't bitter. The final conversation, that never happened. Sometimes, late at night, I imagine him coming back again. Not desperate, not broken, just older. He'd sit at my table. I'd pour us each a drink. We'd talk about Dad's stubbornness, about Mom's garden, about trucks and rivers, and all the things that make up the strange poetry of our bloodline. And when the bottle was empty, maybe he'd look at me and say, "It wasn't supposed to be like this." And maybe I'd say, "No, but maybe it had to be." Then we'd clink glasses, not for revenge or silence this time, but for survival. Part 5. The ledger closes. Years pass the way freight passes over asphalt. A steady hum that becomes the soundtrack to every ordinary day. You don't notice the distance until you realize the map has been quietly folding itself behind you. Arden is 10 now. We never went public. Never chased headlines. We built lanes that paid on time, took care of drivers who keep their promises, and fired clients who treated schedules like suggestions. We learned that dignity is a line item you don't see until you stop discounting it. I still get to the yard early. The air still smells like rubber and coffee and the hint of rain. My office is nothing special. Square desk, 2 chairs, a window that frames a slab of sky. But it's mine. Every morning I sign paper with a fountain pen that came home the long way. Sometimes I run my thumb over the nick in its barrel and think, every scar has payroll. Mom's cardigan hangs on the back of my door. On bad days, I pretend it warms the room. Martin sends postcards from oceans now. He writes in numbers like a man who never learned other alphabets. 21 sunsets without a spreadsheet. BP 120/78. Steps 11,203. Then, invariably, a PS. Remember to let good things compound. I keep them all in a shoebox under the window. The accountant who saved the salvage taught me that even grace needs ledgers. One spring afternoon, the kind where puddles try to argue with the sun, I drive the river road home instead of the highway. I pull over at the old place where the water runs a little faster, the bank lower, the sound loud enough to scrub thoughts clean. I bring two things with me: Dad's watch, still dead and faithful, and the letter Ethan wrote to Mom, photocopied so the original can stay where grief can touch it. I sit on the large rock that used to be our pirate ship, our courtroom, our throne. I turn the watch over in my hands. The cracked face catches a stripe of light. The second hand rests exactly where it always has, like a man refusing to leave a room. Slow, then all at once. I say, because I'm superstitious about talking to ghosts exactly where they taught me things. If you're waiting for a miracle, hands on my shoulders, a sign in the current, a voice from the wrong century. This isn't that kind of story. The river just keeps going. It's the most honest thing I know. But I do feel something shift. Not fate. Not forgiveness, just allowance. The way a tight muscle unclenches after a decade because you finally notice you've been bracing for a punch that isn't coming. I put the watch back in my pocket and head home by the long way, where the road wiggles like a child drawing freedom. A week later, I get a letter. No return address. Postmark smudged. Inside, a photograph. Desert sky, one road, a truck older than good advice. On the back, 3 sentences in block print. Picked up shifts. Learned to fix what I break. I don't drink much anymore. No signature. Didn't need one. I tape it inside the cabinet where we keep spare mugs. Every morning I reach for coffee. Every morning the desert says, still moving. People online ask, sometimes, about the old company. A thread pops up every year on the anniversary of the bankruptcy. Whatever happened with those brothers? Strangers speculate. Some get close. Most don't. A few write fan fiction that confuses me with a man who speaks exclusively in baseball metaphors. It's fine. The internet is just a warehouse where myths refuse to inventory themselves. A junior dispatcher shows me one of those threads one day, nervous. Should I, flag this? She asks. I smile. No need. They're talking about ghosts. You okay with that? I think about it. Then I nod. Yeah, ghosts can't touch the books. There's a driver named Alejo who's been with us since the reboot. He's got a way of saying wisdom like he's tossing you a wrench. One night, we're closing the bay doors and he says, "You know, boss, envy is just counting someone else's money. Gratitude is counting your own." I look at the rows of trucks, backs like patient elephants. I look at the whiteboard with the next day's routes, clean and stubborn. I look at my hands, scar here, ink stain there. How do you always turn philosophy into logistics? I ask. He grins. Because roads teach better than books. I give him a raise the next morning. Practical thanks is the only kind that clears its own invoice. I used to think I'd never see Ethan again. I got good at rehearsing the absence. Every few months, I'd get a scrap, a rumor, a postcard with no name, the kind of story that travels by CB radio and diner waitress. It was enough. Then, on a day so ordinary it was practically anonymous, the receptionist buzzes me. "There's someone here to see you," she says. No name. Says he's early. Early for what? I almost ask. Then I hear the shape of silence on the line and know. He's thinner in the way men get when they trade vanity for miles. His hair is shorter, like maybe a stranger cut it in a kitchen. The blue coat is gone. He wears canvas and sun. His eyes are the right kind of tired. "Hey," he says, and it lands where it should. "Hey," I say. I gesture toward the hallway. "You want coffee?" He glances toward the lobby. "Got anything stronger?" Old reflex kicks in before old fear. A bottle in the bottom drawer, 2 heavy glasses from the cabinet by the sink. I pour. We sit at the small round table that handles everything from budget meetings to birthday cupcakes. The room smells like cardboard and rain. He takes his glass in both hands, but he doesn't drink yet. He studies the surface the way a man reads weather. Finally, I heard you built it right. Right enough, I say. I heard drivers brag about routes like their songs again. That part's true. I heard your accountant retired to a beach. That part's mostly rumor. He gets bored and audits seashells. Ethan laughs, small and real. I wrote him once. Didn't send it. He taps the rim of the glass. Didn't want to make his mailbox ethical. We sit in a human silence. Not the old kind. The kind made of heat and history and unsentences. This one has oxygen in it. He clears his throat. I wanted to say, I know what you did. All of it. And I know why. He looks up. I thought winning would have made you mean. I'm glad it didn't. I got mean in quiet ways, I say. I'm not proud of all of them. Me neither, he says. But I learned how to pack a wheel bearing in a motel parking lot. That's something. It is, I say. We both almost smile. He lifts the glass. I do the same. To Dad, he asks. I shake my head gently. To accurate times. He nods. To accurate times. We drink. It's not penance anymore. It's punctuation. He sets the glass down. Doesn't ask for more. I'm headed north, he says. There's work that way. Word is you treat subcontractors like people. I've heard that rumor. I say. He stands. I stand. Close enough to remember, but not enough to bruise the distance. At the door, he turns. Can I ask you something? Sure. Why the silence? That first night. You said, a drink, and silence. Why silence? Because noise makes men like us heroic. I say. Silence makes us honest. He nods like you nod when a tool finally fits the bolt. Okay. He reaches into his pocket, pulls out a tiny object wrapped in tissue. He places it on the table. I unfold it. A watch crown. Just the crown. Gold dulled by time. Found it in Dad's chair, he says. Figured it belongs with whatever you kept. I don't say thank you because it's too small for the exchange. I just close my hand around it and let a different decade exhale. He leaves without turning back. Some movies need that. Our lives don't. I sit for a long time after he goes, the room slow as a held breath. Then I pick up the bottle, pour a finger, and walk it to the window. Trucks idle in the yard, ready to become lines on maps. I raise the glass to the messy geometry of what remains. To work, I say, and drink. Postscript. Things Reddit would ask, and the answers I never typed. Did you steal the company? No. We reclaimed what negligence was selling for parts. Legally, carefully, slowly, like moving a sleeping animal. Do you regret it? Regret is a full-time job. I already have one. What happened to your brother? He is learning the same way I did, by lifting what's heavy until it's not. Would your father be proud? He'd ask for a P&L first. Then he'd check whether the driver's kids have health insurance. If yes, he'd nod once and tell me to salt the loading ramp before it ices. Are you at peace? Peace is a quiet ledger. Mine balances more days than not. When I lock up for the night, I slip the watch crown into the drawer beside the fountain pen and the photocopied letter. It sits there like a period at the end of a long sentence. On the way out, I switch off the lights bay by bay. The warehouse breathes. The river keeps its counsel. The trucks wait like good horses. I pull the door closed and listen to the click echo once. Clean. Here's to a drink. And silence.